Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 301 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. Well, it's another crazy week of beekeeping. More swarms, stings through my bee suit veil, and some thoughts on why I've finally settled on the Langstroth hive as my preferred home for our bees. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. Today's podcast is sponsored in part by Healthy Bees, Heavy Hives, a new book on beekeeping today with a focus on helping you maximise your yields and, hopefully, increasing profitability in beekeeping, featuring clear diagrams and beautiful photographs that complement a relaxed and humorous writing style which is both enjoyable and informative to read. Available now at Northern Bee Books, Amazon and all good bookstores both online and in your high street. You'll find links in today's podcast notes. Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. At last we have some settled weather. The sun's been shining, both daytime and overnight temperatures have been on the up, and what rain we've had really hasn't been too terrible at all, at least not compared to the spring weather we've had. And that's allowed our bees to really get motoring with building brood, drawing fresh comb and foraging hard on the oilseed rape. I've just had a very late night waiting up for the Aurora Borealis to appear, but it seems I was a day, or rather a night, too late. There is hope that it might appear again this evening, so we'll have to have a look. Despite getting up through the night last night, I didn't see much at all, and certainly not anything worthy of a photograph. Most people here in the UK seem to have grabbed their pictures on Friday night into Saturday morning. For me, it was all a little bit too much really, as I've been having a few late nights shifting colonies around and preparing other colonies that we'd sold ready to be collected. Late nights and early mornings, and well, it just takes its toll, and I just couldn't keep my eyes open on Friday. Maybe there'll be another chance to see the Aurora here in the UK, possibly tonight, but if not, it'll have to be a trip to the Arctic Circle or somewhere else if I feel that keen. We have another customer who's taking some bees from us in the form of a couple of shook swarms. This is a transfer from Langstroth hives into a couple of 14 by 12 national hives, and that's now all complete. The process went really well, and despite the bees getting really quite confused, they settled into their new homes really well, and a quick look into the apiary a couple of days after the process showed lots of bees flying from their new entrance and bringing back lots of pollen. So I'm hopeful it's all gone according to plan. The rather swarmy-like atmosphere in the apiary, by that I mean hundreds of bees flying around in the air near the hive, was caused by the fact that they'd found a small gap between the roof and the feeder combination on the Technoset hives and the super that was beneath the feeder and roof. This was at the back of the hive, so when the shook swarm process was complete, they really didn't know which way to go. Sometimes you'll get what seems like a totally crazy situation with bees everywhere, completely confused, and it feels like they're going to abscond. I guess in some rare situations they do, but on this occasion it was all fine, and once they were left alone to figure it all out themselves, they soon enough found the new entrance and settled down. I'll check in on them again in a day or two, just to check the food stores that I've given them and see if we have a laying queen. Once she's back laying again, we can remove the queen excluder that's between the floor and the brood box, and they're good to go back to their beekeeper. Just down the track from this apiary, we discovered another swarm. I was chatting with the guys on the Coaching Plus group last week on our regular monthly Zoom meeting. The fact that I reckon we've had one of the most swarmy starts to the season for a long time. A rough estimate puts the percentage, I would guess, the total number of swarms somewhere close to 25% of all of our colonies that have swarmed. And of these swarmed colonies, I would say something like 75 to 80% of them have come from our own queen production, so we need to manage that process more closely. Honestly, it was more a case of there's a queen cell, let's pop it into a nuke, rather than queen production. Remember, swarmy bees produce swarmy bees. This particular swarm had got itself under the hive and onto the stand. Not normally a problem, but these stands were those heavy-duty concrete blocks with large holes in them, and the bees had actually dropped themselves down beneath the posts that we have on top of the concrete block and into the block itself. Again, the easiest thing to do was to dismantle the entire stand, shifting the other hive onto the ground temporarily, and then popping a new empty hive on a separate stand where the old hive had been, and simply shaking all of the bees off the wooden cross members and lifting the heavy block to gently brush the bees out and into the hive. Once again, the air was full of very confused bees. The parent colony that had swarmed had popped out a couple of virgin queens, so rather than give them a chance to take to the wing with half of whatever remained in the hive, I shifted them to another position in the apiary. This has the consequence of emptying it of all of its foraging bees back to the original hive site, topping up that swarm in its new box and hopefully increasing the population so they can get stuck into drawing fresh comb. I actually watched one of the new virgin queens emerging, so shifting the position of this hive at this time is perfectly fine. It will take a few days for her to get ready to head out to mate, so there's not going to be any confusion on her part when she returns and struggles to find where she needs to be. Otherwise, she might have flown off to her original hive position, only to be met with aggression from the newly installed swarm. I was at this apiary again just yesterday, Saturday, to check in on them, and I'm happy to say there were lots of bees at the entrance and foragers returning with pollen. Fingers crossed all is well, and we have another building colony that we can take to the borage this summer. You'll remember the huge swarm I spoke about last week. Well, I think it was last week. Well, they're growing as fast as ever and have 20 drawn brood frames stuffed full of stores and eggs. Not as much egg laying as I would have liked, but boy, they've certainly pulled a heap of wax foundation. We've put a third brood box on them to keep the wax production going, and hopefully they'll have that fully drawn the next time I visit. I'm adding brood boxes here because we're looking to make up several splits for the end of May in order to introduce new queens. These colonies will be raised to go to the heather moors later this year, and having them on freshly drawn brood comb throughout will be fantastic for them and hopefully me too. I believe if I'd put supers on them, I'd probably have 4 or 5 filled and capped supers by now. It's been quite remarkable. Despite the swarms, despite the late start, and despite one of our farmers getting his crop management a little bit awry, we're heading for a pretty good spring crop of honey. Some of the boxes are already capped and ready to come back to the honey room, and given the current warm weather, I fully expect more boxes to come off as we get close to that first extraction of the season. This in turn puts pressure back on at the unit here in Norwich. The honey room is a total mess at the moment, boxes and equipment stacked up high. The reasons for this are many. However, one of the biggest reasons is the construction of a new office inside the unit. I'll give you all a guided tour, such that will be in a week or two once I have it finished. But once I'm up and running in there, we'll have the ability to set up my microscopes and leave them set up, rather than having to pack them away each time I use them. So that's going to be fantastic for me. We'll also be able to manage all of our in-house video editing and social media work that I currently carry out from home. It's all a bit of a squished up space here at home in my little study, as I also have our label printer and PC set up next to me as I speak. One of the bottlenecks we've had is trying to get full fibre broadband installed by our local company BT. We need some work to be carried out on the outside of the property, and to cut a very long story short, BT and Openreach have been messing it up since the 29th of February when I placed the order. I'm told we'll have it by the end of next week, but they said that last week, and the week before that, and, well, the week before that too. So don't hold your breath and watch this space, as they say. Anyway, the honey room has been acting as a storeroom, and that all has to get sorted in the next week because oilseed rape honey needs extracting. For those of you with oilseed rape honey and concerns about it granulating, if it's not already started to granulate, simply leave it on the hive until you're ready. It will be fine. If you take it off and put it in your garage for the following day or day after, or you've decided to leave it until the end of the week, then I'm sorry to say it will be solid in the comb and it simply won't extract. Get yourself ready and your extraction room prepared, be it the honey room or your kitchen. Clear the bees out of the supers, whatever method you employ. An overnight clearer board will work fine, and the honey will survive without granulating. But, and it's a big but, the following morning it needs to come back to the honey room, aka kitchen, and be extracted. Just don't leave it alone for any period of time. Otherwise it will need to be cut out, and that's another world of pain for many beekeepers. We're happy enough with granulated honey, as we can use the appy melter when required, but nothing beats a good clean extraction early in the season with all that lovely runny honey going into buckets. I mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast that my hive of choice is the Langstroth hive, and this has really only come about in the last few years of beekeeping. Like most beekeepers, I suspect, I started beekeeping by looking at someone else's bees in their hive, and for most people here in the UK, just as I found, the bees were in a standard national beehive. I bought my first beehive from someone who was giving up, and those were standard national beehives. And really, it wasn't until I started the YouTube videos that I began to think about other hive types. What was available? Why do other beekeepers use different hives? I wanted to experiment and show other beekeepers the different types of hives that were out there. Having tried a lot of different hives and been lucky enough to be supported by the likes of Maysmore Apiaries, Thorns and Modern Beekeeping, I discovered the poly-commercial and poly-Langstroth hives. Add to this the trend over the past years for larger colonies produced by so-called buckfast queens, and it became obvious that the standard national, although held dearly in the hearts of many UK beekeepers, simply wasn't big enough for these much larger brood nests. Double brooding is possible, but I find it a cumbersome and difficult process. Add to that the old back problems I've suffered over the years, and the honeypole Langstroth hive seems to fit the bill perfectly. Currently, the majority of our colonies that are in 10-frame Langstroth hives have brood across 8 or even 9 frames. This would simply fill a standard national hive to bursting and overflow. There's just not enough room. An alternative, if you feel the desire to stick with nationals, would be the 14 by 12 brood box, or in fact the commercial, both similar in capacity. Yet I find the deeper frames, particularly of the 14 by 12, tricky to manipulate at times. So it's the Langstroth for me. I've finally thrown my hat into the ring, and I'm happy to say after all these years I have just the one hive type that I have to move around and play with. Finally, my new bee suit. I was lucky enough to be able to spend some time wandering around the trade show at the BBKA Spring Convention this year and happened upon the Oz Armour bee suit. Having never tried one before, I made a purchase for myself and Steph so I could give a proper verdict on it after a few weeks of wearing it. The jury's still out, but here are my initial thoughts. It's a beast of a suit. It's quite heavy and has this open mesh construction with lots of zips and lots of Velcro, and it comes with both the standard fencing veil and the traditional round hat style veil. Well, my first impressions have been mixed. Although it feels heavy to lift when you're putting it on, once it's on, it's surprisingly comfortable in terms of the weight. Because it's a mesh design, it's supposed to allow the air to flow through and keep you cool, which it does when there's a breeze blowing. It was suggested that shorts and t-shirt were the way forward, so I've tried that. However, after a day's beekeeping, it looks like someone's been slapping my knees with a bamboo cane, so red are they. I think it's the mesh material that rubs and chafes on my knees, so it's back to lightweight trousers for me. Steph encountered an immediate problem that's quite a worry. When we're rushing around the hives and inspecting, the easiest place for the smoker is between your legs, held by the bellows between your knees. But when you're in a bit of a rush, sometimes it's the cage and not the bellows that gets gripped. In a standard bee suit, you feel the heat quickly and move the smoker before your legs get burnt if you happen to grip that cage and not the bellows. Unfortunately, the Oz Armour suits simply melt with the heat, so we have a bee suit with a rather melted hole in one inner knee location. Not great. Fortunately, Steph didn't burn herself as she was wearing trousers. If it had been me, I may have a nasty burn on my leg by now. The bigger issue for me is being stung. The suit manufacturers claim you won't be stung through the suit, and so far that's been true. The problem I have is that with the veil attached, I have a tendency to turn and lean with my head and shoulders as I inspect. This means my forehead makes contact with the veil material, and it's as if there's an alarm that sounds for the bees that screams, "Sting here." I've now been stung 3 times through the veil. You could say it's my fault because of the way I inspect, and no one else is regularly getting stung through their veil with this suit, so it should be fine. Yet I've had many different bee suits and jackets over the years, and this is the first time I've encountered this problem. We'll have to see if changing the fencing veil for the round veil makes a difference and feels comfortable for me to wear. Otherwise, this bee suit could end up in the storeroom gathering dust along with all the other equipment I don't use anymore. I'll let you know how I get on in due course. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website, www.norfolk-honey.co.uk, and for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks, and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.